Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs, your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We are back. If you're listening to us for the first time, where have you been? We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify. We are, of course, across all audio platforms. We're also across Instagram, we are on X, we're on Facebook too, and we are still in the midst of the January transfer window here as we are counting down, believe it or not, to the final week of this window soon to come. Are we expecting moments of madness, a week of madness? We shall see. Joining me as ever alongside me to really home in on what's to come, I've got the wonderful, and he's been here since the start, as always. He's every window. Matty Hayes is back alongside me. Matty, how are you, my man?
I'm all good. It's FA Cup round 4 week, which isn't always a big deal, but we're playing Man City, so it's quite a big deal. Been a good window for Spurs, and look on these podcasts, I feel like I'm a viewer and a listener as much as I'm a co-host. So I'm looking forward to what we get to hear tonight.
Absolutely. Look, we aren't far away from the FA Cup, of course, against Man City. And I will, if we've got time, get Ben's very quick thoughts on that. Of course, the man on the TalkSport radar now. We've got to get Ben's thoughts on that. It's a huge, huge game, of course, for Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. For some, the biggest of the season. But look, we've still got transfer business to resolve before Man City comes into the frame tomorrow and Friday and takes over, of course, the rest of our week. Delighted to have this man back alongside us. Look, you know when this man shows up, the transfer window's open. We're always humbled. We're honoured and privileged to welcome back to the show. He is the one, the only, TalkSport's very own, the commentator, broadcaster, events host. We're delighted to welcome back Ben Jacobs is in the house. Ben, how are you? Twice this month, we are blessed.
Good evening. It's good to be back. And have you noticed as well that my jumper and Matty's background are matching? It wasn't intentional.
I don't believe that. There was a call beforehand on that one for sure. 100%. Honestly.
I swear there wasn't.
Ben, lovely to welcome you back. How are you? Looking really fresh. Is that because the window's been fairly kind to you so far?
No, it's more just because I've been out for a late night dog walk. I did the dog walk before the show, not after it, to give us a little bit more time. And there's obviously this storm going around. I must be in Edinburgh at the moment. And it's so windy that I've come in pink face. So I might look healthy now, but by the time it wears off and I warm up halfway through the show, I will return to my vampire state, I can promise you.
Well, just what I love about Last One of Spurs. Where do we go with comments like that? Just an unbelievable show that you don't know what's going to come next. Listen, we're always welcome. We're humbled and privileged to have Ben join us here. I'm going to hand over to Matt, if I can, to launch this next episode of Last One on Spurs. Always fun. It's the transfer window. You never know what's coming. Matty, kick us off.
Yeah, I'm going to start this with a line that we've been saying for the majority of the window so far, and even though we've said it probably 3 times a week, it still seems strange to say, but Spurs have been one of the busiest sides in this transfer window, Ben, securing Ange Postecoglou's main targets with Timo Werner and Radu Dragusin coming in. And look, Tottenham have shown they're able to work a bit more freely in the transfer window than other teams with their financial fair play awareness, we'll call it, over the last couple of years. Looking at the market as a whole, and we're looking at these teams, a few Forest and Everton especially, being caught up in this PSR stuff. How different has this market been to others when you compare the lack of business from the other 19 Premier League clubs?
Yeah, there's an interesting backstory, actually, just to start with a complete tangent and set the tone there for a wild deviation. Brennan Johnson moving to Tottenham plays a factor in the punishments that may come for Nottingham Forest, and obviously Everton are the other one, their charges at the moment. But the argument that Forest make is that Brennan Johnson could have gone to Brentford before the deadline for accounting purposes. And even though at the time we were told the Brentford offer was lower and therefore Forest were not that enamoured by the finances, now sources indicate that Johnson didn't want to go because he thought Spurs would be possible. The Harry Kane saga dragged on a little bit. He ended up joining Spurs for more money, but had he joined Brentford, Forest kind of argue that maybe they wouldn't be in hot water and a possible points deduction. So that's sort of very interesting how Spurs have actually inadvertently played a part in that, but ultimately you can't force the player to go to a particular club. Coming back to your question, I think Tottenham have been decisive for 2 reasons. One, Ange Postecoglou, and clearly there's control there, and he doesn't want to mess around on targets and being hands-on. If he has felt in this window that somebody is not possible, having chosen to, in many cases, speak to players directly multiple times and early, he's indicated to his recruitment team that it's time to move on. And I do think that being a new recruitment team, they're taking his lead. The second thing is obviously necessity, and Tottenham obviously had to move due to a mixture of things, injuries, the Asian Cup as well, particularly with Son. And I think that Timo Werner has been born out of that, and is also a very Ange Postecoglou-like player because he's high octane and he's versatile as well. And I know we'll kind of go into a bit more detail about the actual signings. So the broad point I would make is that Tottenham have been smart with their finances, allowing them to move in what is usually a seller's market. There's a necessity due to injuries and players away mid-season. And I think the other thing, which looks like Tottenham have been more aggressive, if you like, is just the pre-planning allowed them to get a few over the line early. And Postecoglou, as I've said, led that. Whereas other rivals just haven't had that urgency. So now maybe towards the end of the window, Manchester United would love an experienced striker. Chelsea would love another forward. Arsenal, if finances allowed, might consider another striker or midfielder. So you can make arguments, and fans tend to always want more and more and more. But my point is that Arsenal spent a lot in the summer, Declan Rice being one of their flagship signings. Chelsea spent a lot during the summer. Even Manchester United, despite various sagas and missed targets, ended up spending quite a lot, above their pre-planned budget anyway. And as a consequence of, say, Mount and Onana, they again have to rein it in. Liverpool did their midfield revamp. So many ask me, but haven't they still got the 100 million that they failed to utilise on Moises Caicedo? Well, maybe, but I would imagine they're being patient and they'll put that towards a couple of players in the summer. And we know that Manchester City are relatively content with what they've got. So Tottenham are at the beginning of this kind of 3 to 4 window project. And Postecoglou stressed that constantly, even when they were top of the table. It was all about how this is a new beginning, structurally, foundationally, and on the football side as well. And when you have a new beginning, you often do need new signings that fit the system. Because as I said the last time I came on, it's a big leap stylistically from Conte ball to Ange ball. And certain players fit and certain players don't. And I think that's where the opportunism to be busy in January comes from. So it's ultimately a compliment to a well-run club financially, plus more control being handed over to Postecoglou. But I also think that there was a need to be decisive due to things out of Tottenham's control, especially the injuries and players like Son away at the Asian Cup, and obviously others participating in the African Cup of Nations.
Now, Ben, as always, we're always delightful that you bring us such insight and knowledge into Tottenham. And one of the stories, this is the thing with transfer windows and with news, it can occur any point at any time in any kind of fashion. One of the things that has come out in the last 24 hours is that former Tottenham Hotspur owner Joe Lewis will plead guilty to passing aside information to his private pilots and girlfriends. That's according to his lawyer. And that's, of course, at the moment being reported by Bloomberg. Jews on the screens there asked the question, what, if any, impact will that have to Spurs, both on and off the pitch? And again, I have to make that point. He obviously is no longer the Tottenham Hotspur owner. So over to you, Ben, if you can tell us any more information on that.
As you say, from October the 5th, 2022, Lewis was no longer a controlling person within Tottenham. And I use the word controlling because this word control is in the Premier League owners and directors handbook, if you like, for how an individual is judged. And should an individual succumb to criminal charges whilst incumbent within a club, under the rules, they can still be removed. And naturally, what the Premier League do is they wait for the court to run its process, and then they determine whether or not they need to take action. And if Lewis was still, as he was prior to October the 5th, 2022, a controlling figure and ultimately the owner of Tottenham, then this would be a big issue and Tottenham would have to deal with it and comment. But Tottenham's argument is basically that now the controlling owner of the football club is the Lewis Family Trust, not Lewis directly. And he's not influencing the football club. He's not controlling anything. And as a result, these charges are independent of Tottenham. And as a result, whatever happens in terms of punishments and how this saga materializes has no bearing, practically speaking, or punishment speaking, on the football club. So in that respect, fans can rest easy. What actually has happened today is not just the reporting and the speculation over a guilty plea that you outline. It is actually a guilty plea. So there's a statement that has been issued on behalf of Joe Lewis, and what it confirms is that he attended a court in Manhattan and he did actually make a guilty plea. And in doing so, he said he apologizes for his conduct and is embarrassed. And the backstory here is relatively well reported. Lewis is now 86. He was essentially accused of passing on information about his companies to private pilots, friends, assistants, and even some romantic partners as well. And the US authorities have alleged, and we now have a guilty plea, that this constituted fraud to the tune of millions of dollars. And Lewis has always said that he did not profit, but those naturally that had information passed on to them did. And this is all really in relation to Lewis's investment firm, which is known as the Tavistock Group. And the estimated worth of that group is somewhere in the region, give or take, of 5 billion. So we know that Lewis was arrested in July 2023. And the interesting subplot of the arrest was the fact that we only really learned then, at least I did anyway, and I think many other journalists, that there'd been this change of ownership in October 2022 that didn't have Lewis as the owner. So the natural conclusion was, isn't he still in charge at Spurs? Couldn't this have repercussions? Will he be forced to sell the club? But we now know that he's stepped back. So I'm sure that Tottenham fans are concerned. I'm sure that they also worry there'll be a connection back to the club and therefore a potential punishment. But the reality of the situation is twofold. Number one, it doesn't actually have a direct bearing from a punishment point of view to Spurs. And number two is Lewis is 86. So either there has to be a long-term plan anyway to determine whether the family trust are going to continue owning and controlling the club. And that is the kind of legacy because of Lewis's age. And obviously that transition has already happened. And we know that Daniel Levy is basically the day-to-day controller anyway of the club, or whether these long-term rumours, speculations, even formative talks, as I reported exclusively with QSI, whether that actually is the beginning of a snowball effect towards a sale or investment, in the same way we've seen with Manchester United, in the same way Liverpool looked for strategic options, in the same way that Chelsea was forced to sell because of the Abramovich situation. Will Spurs, under very different circumstances, be next? And is that part of a long-term plan? Now, I have no indications that Levy or the Lewis Family Trust are open at this point to a full sale. The talks with QSI were more around minority investment, and they were very formative, and they've led nowhere as things stand. So we have to wait and see, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, Spurs are the next club to put themselves on the market in some capacity, whether that's full sale or whether that's strategic investment. And I think it's normal because you've got the new stadium and a fantastic training facility. If they can get European, hopefully Champions League football in a couple of back-to-back seasons, there's an expanded Club World Cup. There's lots of new income opportunities in evolving parts of the world, like Saudi Arabia, that are commercially lucrative. So with Spurs' infrastructure, with the location being in London, there's always a chance that the feeling within the Lewis family trust, and you could argue Lewis himself, even if not directly involved, and maybe even Levy, there's maybe a sense that at some point in time in the next 3 to 5 years, Tottenham could make those involved in the club at the moment quite a lot of money. And as we see this trend towards big clubs putting themselves on the market for, at minimum, strategic investment, and in light of those QSI talks that I mentioned, it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Tottenham are the next club. I'm not saying it's going to be imminent today, tomorrow. I'm certainly not suggesting that anything is far down the line, but there's usually no smoke without fire. And in the last year or so, I think we've heard a lot about potential investors. We've heard a lot of people knocking on the door and getting knocked back by Daniel Levy. I still think it's only a matter of time before Spurs formally confirm in the next 3 to 5 years that they are at least considering some form of strategic investment. And I think Levy kind of said that, didn't he, on record when he was asked about the situation, that although there's not a public tender out there, if the right offer comes along, you have a duty as a football club in this modern era of football to at least give it consideration.
Look, Ben, thank you for that clarity. If that's one word you do get with Ben, it's absolute clarity on the situation. So look, we've dived somewhere we wasn't going to dive, and Ben, as always, gives you the knowledge and intel that we know on that situation. Now, Ben, for our listeners on audio, we are now in the final week of the transfer window, and there are still plenty of decisions to make for Tottenham Hotspur. Since we last spoke earlier this month, you opened the window for us here in Last One on Spurs. Tottenham moved early, which is not something you can say very often in this window or in other windows previously. We got in two of the most important players, arguably Andrew said, through the door in the shape of 27-year-old Timo Werner, on loan from RB Leipzig with a buy option of 15.5 million. And to add to that, it was a battle which, Ben, you avoided for all your sheer determination on Last Word on Spurs. They did land the 21-year-old Romanian centre-half, Radu Dragusin, but there was a fight for him, there was, on a permanent deal from Genoa. What's your feelings, Ben, on both of those respective deals for Tottenham, given the fact we didn't have you here when they were happening?
Well, let's start with Dragusin, because as I said at the time, and thankfully from a Spurs perspective, I was proven right. They were very confident and optimistic of getting it done quickly, and they got it over the line. And yes, there was a kind of buy-in hijack, but they were too late in the race. And even though there was some very public, and I thought bizarre comments to say in the aftermath that somehow the player was wowed by Bayern but gave his word to Spurs, the reality is that for all the noise, he's a Tottenham player. And if he wanted to go to Bayern, he could have gone to Bayern. So we have to assume that Tottenham is his number one choice, despite some agent comments suggesting that it was a really hard decision, and almost implying, if we're reading between the lines, that if Bayern had bothered to come earlier, it might have been a different story. But the optimism was always there from Tottenham. And the reason for that was, again, Ange Postecoglou being decisive. I'm told that he had 4 conversations with the player in the space of about 72 hours and kept in contact with him on WhatsApp or whatever platform he uses for messaging. Might be iMessage. Don't quote me on the WhatsApp part of that story. But anyway, Postecoglou made sure that every single day in the build-up to that transfer happening, Dragusin was aware of the Tottenham project, of the Tottenham facilities, of his Tottenham teammates, of the welcome that he would receive, of the package that he would receive. And we know that personal terms were already agreed, but Postecoglou went a bit further than that to kind of project into the future about his pathways and his potential. And you don't see that often from managers, because you get an offer, you accept that offer. But what might your wage be in 2 years' time? What might your bonuses be like if Tottenham win the Champions League? Things that are maybe not definitively written into contracts. And I think Postecoglou is really smart because he's clear and he takes the time to make contact. And a lot of players say this because obviously more transfers fail than happen. And so many players I speak to say, well, I was left hanging. The club promised me the world, they found a better option, or they didn't agree a fee, and then I never heard from anyone again. Brian Brobbery, the Ajax player that's been linked with Manchester United, kind of implied that. 2022, Ten Hag's all over him. 2023, the link comes up again, and the player says, well, the manager hasn't spoken to me for months. It's not a criticism on Ten Hag, but some managers are just very astute at keeping in contact with players. Jurgen Klopp's another one. You may have noted when the Henderson exit was happening from Saudi Arabia, Klopp did an interview and said, well, I'm in contact with Jordan Henderson. And some might think, well, why? He's not coming back to Liverpool. They're by no means best friends, manager-captain relationship, but there's a generational gap. Klopp's busy. Why would he be messaging Henderson left, right, and centre? And again, it's that consistent narrative. And Postecoglou, even though there's no indication at the time we're recording this that Tottenham will move for Jota, is also in contact with Jota. And this shows you the sort of measure of the man, not forgetting players. Last night, when we saw Chelsea qualify for the League Cup final, Maurizio Pochettino went over to Glover, who he knows because Spurs youth. And again, they had a big, long conversation in the immediate aftermath, even though Postecoglou and I think Pochettino and Ten Hag, because he won a trophy, let's not forget, last season, they could all just get caught up in their own clubs. They could all just get caught up in their own moments. Pochettino could have easily gone and celebrated with the home fans and ignored a goalkeeper he knows who'd conceded 6 goals. And again, Postecoglou could say, I'm at Spurs. Why do I care about Jota? And Ten Hag can say, I won a trophy last season. Why do I care about any of my ex-players? And 2 of those managers of the 3 are very good at keeping in contact. The other, there's a question mark. And Klopp, as I say, is exceptional as well. So this was a big part in Dragusin. because Postecoglou didn't let it rest, even with a player that he didn't know as well, naturally. And the reason for that is because Tottenham realised very early that Nice's Jean-Claire Todibo, who they liked and they opened talks with, as we said on day one of the window, was not feasible. And you may remember I told you at the time that my feeling from sources was that Nice's not for sale stance was genuine. Yeah. And if it was to be changed, it would take close to 60 million euros. And now as we get towards the end of the window, we're getting a lot of reports that confirm that. 60 million euros is the number, otherwise it's not for sale. So Spurs were smart. They pivoted, and Dragusin was turned to because he's this intelligent and quite tactically open-minded defender. And he's also got a very strong ability to cover others. He plays left centre-back, but can also play right centre-back. And in a back three has played in the centre as well. So the versatility is there too. And I think this is what Postecoglou wants. If you look at Porro or Edogi, even though now we're talking about a different position, they've been able to adapt from kind of wing backs to inverted fullbacks. And I think the feeling with Dragusin is exactly the same, that there's that versatility. And the V word applies also to Timo Werner. In the short term, he's a kind of stopgap. In the long term, if it succeeds, they can buy him. So there's versatility as far as the deal is concerned. And then there's obviously football versatility with Werner as well, because he can play in a variety of different positions. He's a very Ange Postecoglou-like player. He's high octane. And it's going to be interesting when everyone comes back to see where he fits in, because we know that Son could obviously play behind Richarlison, but we know that Son really excelled playing in a leading role when Maddison was fit. But then that would take Richarlison, in likelihood anyway, out of the side. So where does Werner play? And where does he play in relation to Son and Richarlison, who was the form player in December with 5 Premier League goals in 5 games? So there's almost like a now factor that prompted a surprise move, it has to be said, for Timo Werner. And then if it works, there's a future possibility. The question mark over Werner is he's frustrating in the same way maybe Kai Havertz is as well, although Havertz has been asked to play pretty much everywhere this season. And I'm not going to mention the A word, as I always say on this podcast. So if we kind of come back to Werner, he makes you ask a lot more questions and scratch your head over moments in games. But he gets his fair share of assists. He pressurizes players. And if he could ever just put the ball in the back of the net 5, 6, 7 more times in a season, he would be very much worth making the 15.5 million signing option. But it's just whether or not he proves infuriating. I think against Manchester United, he showed everything. He showed that he can win the ball. He showed that he can run his socks off for 90 minutes. He showed he can be creative. He showed he can stretch defenses. He showed he's got pace. He showed he's high octane. Those are the positives. But he also showed that he can make very poor decisions in front of goal. And he showed that he can struggle to hit the target, which is why ultimately he didn't get a decent return of goals at either Leipzig or, unfortunately, with his move to Chelsea as well. So Spurs have to try and get the best out of him. But maybe, just maybe, the aim of Werner, as well as cover, is not to shoulder the burden of goals. Because if Maddison comes back with goals and assists, if Richarlison continues his scoring streak, if Son returns from the Asian Cup and starts scoring, if Kulusevski weighs in with some, then maybe the output from Werner is only 3 or 4 goals in the second half of the season, 3 or 4 assists. And then those inadvertent stuff that are not direct assists, that are not direct contributions, but you look back at the video and you say, well, he won the ball and 5 passes later we scored, or he prompted an error and 2 phases of play later we got a goal. And that's the thing that Postecoglou likes about Werner, and it just might be an inspired signing.
Yeah. Gotta just say, you just get these golden nuggets from Ben with regards to some of the management of Ange. I love in the comments when it starts kicking off, was it Telegram? Was it WhatsApp? Was it iMessage? Just how did he contact him? How did he contact him? It's brilliant. Matty, I'm going to hand over to you.
I love the idea of Ange on Snapchat putting on like the dog filter or something when as he's messaging Dragusin. Look, Ben, on top of those 2 signings that you spoke about there, there's been a lot of departures from Tottenham this window. Hugo Lloris and Eric Dyer brought to an end a long spell at the club, and of course Ivan Perisic gone on loan to Hajduk Split until the end of his contract. We've seen a few loan moves as well, with Sergio Reguilon, Jed Spence, Jaffa Tanganga all recalled from their loans and sent out to new clubs, and Alfie Devine as well, moving from Port Vale to Plymouth. Some other players, Ashley Phillips, Matthew Craig and Josh Keeley, who were at the club at the start of the season, all gone out on loan as well, with already out there in Ndombele, Roden and Troy Parrott. Spurs have wasted absolutely no time in getting these deals across the line, and it's been a criticism that's been leveled against Fabio Paratici, not only in his first few years at Tottenham, but in his previous clubs as well, that he has at times struggled to get players off the books. But how have you been impressed with the way that Tottenham have gone about moving these players away this month?
I've been very impressed, and we can rattle through some of them. Obviously, clearing out the squad for size and getting some off the wage bill, and bringing in some loan fees, for example, can be very useful. I think they might have liked to get that one big fee. It will be very interesting in hindsight to sort of say to someone at the club, would you have rather got 3 or 4 out on loan or sold Højbjerg, for example, and being able to move for a midfielder? So maybe the one, I wouldn't call it a criticism because it's a difficult market to work in, but maybe the one counterpoint to Tottenham have done very well to offload a number of players is they've not brought in that one big fee, guaranteed fee, that allows them to maybe move in the last few days of the window if we're only looking financially. But maybe they don't need another sale in order to actually progress with a midfielder. Perhaps it is more just about squad space rather than finances. So if Højbjerg stays, you don't get another midfielder because Højbjerg stays, as opposed to saying it's because we can't afford another midfielder. It's more about Postecoglou wanting to keep the squad size the same or even reduce it a little bit after, of course, Werner and Dragusin came in. That's the irony. You need 2, so you want to increase your squad size. But once you've got those 2, you almost want to keep it the same. So you're still dealing with 23 to 25 players, not 26, 27, 28, which has been a problem at Chelsea, especially if you look back to the January before last. I think Dyer to Bayern was driven by the player. He pre-agreed the terms first and then had a bit of a nervous wait to see whether Bayern decided that he was the defender that they wanted. After that, it was quite a smooth negotiation. With Reguilon, he was always likely to be recalled. Tottenham knew that from Manchester United because there was a mid-season break and Luke Shaw had obviously come back from injury. And now we see this move to Brentford. There's no option. And Tottenham will have to resolve that one again and hope that his value raises. And it's very likely, I think, that Brentford will come in for the player permanently if all goes according to plan. Spence was quite smart because they were obviously able to concurrently negotiate with Dragusin and get him off to Genoa. And I do think that helped on the club side. Lloris was the most sentimental one, naturally going to Los Angeles, and it gets him off the wage bill. I still think if we're being hypercritical, Tottenham would have liked that to be done in the summer and ended up having to find a solution because he'd stayed at the club for longer. But they wanted to be respectful to Lloris and say, even though you're not part of our plans, we're certainly not going to force you out of the club. Tanganga, I think, is a really inspired move because Joe Edwards is a fantastic manager with huge potential. And Tanganga, actually, when he was with, I think, Tottenham's under-23s, played against the Chelsea academy team that Edwards, before he moved to Millwall, was managing, and was very impressed. And I'm told that Edwards was the motivating factor as to why Tanganga was prepared to go. And it hadn't worked out at Augsburg anyway, so he needs minutes. And then with Alfie, I thought he did very well at Port Vale, who are obviously disappointed to see him recalled. I think he played close to 30 games. He got some goals as well. But again, in the same way that Edwards is the right manager for Tanganga, Ian Foster is somebody that I've been very impressed with. I know him from my time in Saudi, where he was Steven Gerrard's number 2. But if we go back a little bit further, he was obviously mentoring a number of young players when managing various England youth teams. So that's what you want. When you send a player there, you have to feel like they're going to play. And you have to feel if they don't play, that the majority of their time is training. So that other 5 days of the week, how much one-on-one time are they going to get with managers and coaching? How much direction are they going to get? It's very easy to go into a club and feel like they're bought for minutes and it suits all parties. So then if they play, you forget about it. But it's almost pointless playing every week if you don't learn and develop other than the in-game experience. What's equally as important is the right coach behind the scenes. And Ian Foster's done everything. He's been a sports therapist. He's been a university lecturer and teacher. He's been a psychologist. He's been a number 2. And now he's a number 1. He's worked with youth groups with England. And I think when you add all of that up, the diverse skill set he brings for mentoring young players in particular is perfect. So I'm very interested to see how that one works out.
Yeah, listen, again, it's going to be interesting to see again as we enter that final week as to what's going to happen. What we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show here for our listeners and audio. I've got to say, there's 1,000+ of you watching us live across all of our platforms. Again, thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. Not just today, not just last time Ben's been on, but throughout this January transfer window. Look, we went early. Spurs went early. I know it's not often we say that. Spurs did go early. And here we are. Ben back on. Are we going to get any surprise in the final week? That's what everyone wants to know. It is time for the mastermind round because this is where we start firing the names at Ben that all of you want to know. And this man gives us the answers to all those questions. Look, before I do come on to those names that many want to know about, it does feel like, Ben, as we enter this final 7 days for our listeners on audio, that the two remaining main possibilities of arrivals for Tottenham could come in the form of a new midfielder, and also the potential of a player coming in on a buyback option as such, where Spurs would make that deal, but the respective player would stay at their parent club and then potentially come to the football club in the summer. To your understanding, is those the final couple of positions Spurs could look to target in this final 7 days?
Yeah, I think so. And also the summer window as well. I think we're looking at 2024. If the right targets emerge, I agree with you. It will be a midfielder, central, and in addition to that, some kind of younger and more versatile, either forward or creative-minded player. And were they to get both, then it's job done this window. And maybe you start thinking about who's a bit more experienced, who might be a, in inverted commas, Harry Kane type replacement for the summer. And if Tottenham can get Champions League football, it comes with budget. So then they may be able to be ambitious and go for somebody at a bigger fee who is more established. And we've spoken many times about the names, but I would almost wait to see where Spurs are, because players may want Champions League football if they're very elite. Daniel Levy, for example, the last time Tottenham qualified for the Champions League, injected about 100 million extra into the club that was spent in that crazy window where Conte somehow signed about 1,000 players and most of them were just squad players. I lost count after 6 spent.
Every other club signed. They're all club signings.
But now I think the point is you need players like Maddison who are relatively universally considered to be starting 11 when fit. And if you can get one or two of them, particularly in the summer now, then Tottenham are going to be in good shape. So I think that midfielder might come in depending on the situation with Højbjerg. And I think a young, versatile forward or a creative-minded player who can score goals and get assists will also be one of the priorities as well. I think when we talk about Nusa, and I won't give too much away because I know you want to talk about him a little bit later, that's quite interesting because it will show whether Spurs really care about the now or whether they're prepared to wait, because that deal is all about Bruges. It's not Tottenham saying, we'll loan him back to you because he's one for the future. It's Bruges and the player saying, we don't want to do anything in January. So if Spurs are to move, they have to try and get ahead in the market. And if they are to secure him, they've kind of got to cede to Bruges' terms. And that will obviously tell you that if Spurs do buy young, they're happy to buy young and versatile and creative-minded with a view to the future, as opposed to bringing in a young player and saying we might give minutes this season, which means there isn't the January urgency, there's the longer term planning. So that may give away the fact that in an ideal world, a midfielder is needed now and a younger, versatile forward or creative-minded player can wait until the summer. So if they can move ahead in the market and secure that now, whether it's Nusa or whether it is a player that can join before the end of the month and play for Spurs, therefore, into February, that's fine. But if they have to put that on ice, there's so many young players in this kind of genre of footballers, if we can term it that I think they'll be fine to wait until the summer. So I don't think there'll be any panic buying. I don't think there's any urgency, not with that second position. But I do think that if the right midfielder becomes available in January, then I would expect Spurs to try and pull the trigger.
Let's talk about Nusa in a bit more detail, Ben. Like you said there, Tottenham have expressed interest in the gifted 18-year-old Norwegian who took Club Brugge by storm with some of his appearances last season. And this season, he's continued that upward trajectory. On the international stage, he's got a goal and 4 assists in his first 4 matches. He's also become the youngest ever goal-scoring debutant in Champions League history with his strike against Porto. And the comparisons that are being made are very, very, very kind to him. He's been compared to Neymar and Martin Odegaard. I think himself, he said as well that Ronaldinho was one of his footballing idols, and the similarities are there to see. I'm not getting too ahead of myself. And according to reports in Norway, he could be available for £30 million with a loan deal back to Club Brugge for the rest of the season. He's a player that's caught the eye of Chelsea, Liverpool and Arsenal in the past, and Newcastle at the moment, rumoured to potentially be looking at him to replace Miguel Almiron. But looking at the Tottenham side of things, how much of a statement signing do you think it would be for Spurs if they could get this one over the line? And how confident are you that the Spurs can manage to do just that?
Well, it would show that they're window planning and trying to get ahead of the market. And that's smart, not just to be fast, but they realise some other clubs can't move. Newcastle don't have 30 million. And even in a structure that is a loan until the end of the season, and then ultimately returning to the parent club, whether that's Spurs or Newcastle in this example, you would still have to structure the deal in a way where if you buy, you buy. So as a consequence, unless it's structured as a loan with obligation, if it's a buy and then a loan back, there'll likely be a first instalment. And I don't think that Newcastle have that kind of money at this stage. It's a different story, as you say, if Miguel Almiron leaves. But right now, a broken exclusive that said Al Shabab had agreed with Newcastle, but there's no agreement with Almiron. And all indications are that nobody's actually approached the player side yet. The Saudi deal makers have gone to the club first. So Almiron may turn around and say, no, thank you. And that's the end of the matter. But I think Tottenham are quite confident that they're not going to get hijacked by a Premier League rival at this stage. Chelsea are the ones to watch because Chelsea came quite close to signing Nusa towards the back end of the summer. But if Chelsea buy, they again would like now. So it's quite clever by Spurs to be saying to Bruges, we'll do this on your terms if we can get it over the line financially. We're not fussed if we don't have him to play for us in the month of January. What we're looking for is to secure him for the summer. And if they can do that, you might find that a Chelsea say, we're not going to bother reigniting our interest because we can't get him right now. And it's guaranteed to me by sources close to the player and by those within the Club Brugge hierarchy that they're not looking to do anything unless they can keep the player until the end of the season. So you've got a loan with a kind of summer pre-season aspect, and you can either loan therefore with obligation, or alternatively, you can buy now and loan back. But there's really not many other options unless you just want to wait until the summer. But then no doubt Tottenham feel that there'll be other interested parties because he'll be available instantly. So then you might risk a bidding war. The price might go up. So Tottenham have advanced this. Nothing is done yet, as far as I'm aware. I'll put in some further inquiries either this evening or tomorrow. But as you rightly say, it's somewhere in the region of a 27 to 30 million package. And the initial structure being discussed was a buy with loan back. But that could change to simply a pre-agreed deal for the summer, or potentially a opportunity to do a structure that sort of still benefits, I think, Bruges. And loan with obligation was discussed. And the reason why I mentioned loan with obligation is obviously if it was a loan to Spurs with an obligation to buy, that doesn't really help Bruges in any way, unless you persuade them that you're going to pay a big loan fee first, cover the wages and pay a big obligation. So then you're spreading the payment, which financially helps, but you're paying a whole lot more. And I don't see why Tottenham would entertain that. But that was the only thing I was told. And it can be quite confusing when you hear all these different terms and you think, well, are we just signing him or not? Give me a yes or no. All I can tell you is it's advanced. But the point is that were Bruges to entertain a now, then they would basically want an astronomical fee. Tottenham wouldn't pay the astronomical fee. So their only option would be to say, we'll stagger it as a loan with obligation to spread the cost. And then Bruges would say, well, we still want the same number, but we'll let you do it as a loan fee. And then an obligation at the end of that to get to this astronomical number because we're giving you the player now. And in the early stages, all these different structures were perhaps discussed. But again, to reiterate, the Bruges side were clear pretty much from day one. And the player side, they don't feel mid-season is the right time to move. So I think this will just be about structure. And there is a realistic chance this one gets done. But at the moment, I can only confirm that the talks are ongoing and advanced rather than anything is agreed. The beauty is that we're at the stage of the window where it can change within a minute, an hour, a day, because there's only about a week left of the window. A bit more broadly, if Tottenham are to succeed, what they're getting is a few things that are a little bit different to some other profiles and targets that are out there. I think the first thing to reiterate is two-footed. And that's very rare. And he genuinely is strong on both feet. He's a wide forward with lightning pace. And as you rightly say, he's compared to Neymar. Some of his teammates actually call him NN, which stands for Norwegian Neymar. And like I said before, Chelsea tried, but he didn't want to move in that last summer, and Bruges were reluctant to sell. And I think this is why we're hearing reports that Chelsea might pivot to someone like John Duran at one end, a very kind of rough-edged young player, or even Karim Benzema, if we're to believe rumours, although it's not really being stood up yet at the end of Chelsea sources, but at the other extreme, an older player. And the things those two have in common is they're both potentially available right now, whereas it looks like Tottenham are prepared to be patient and simultaneously wait for Nusa, but also try and get ahead of the market now rather than risking getting sucked into a saga and a bidding war come summer.
Ben, talk about bidding wars, sagas. One name that does not seem to leave our lips during this window and also the previous summer window is that of Conor Gallagher. Now, bearing in mind the situation around the player where he now finds himself in a cup final for his boyhood football club, but these rumours don't seem to go away that Chelsea will need to sell arguably one, if not a couple, of their homegrown talents due to the PSR situation that many clubs are facing in the Premier League. Ben, are you able to give us some concrete exclusive as to whether you genuinely feel, because I feel like this name is not going away this window, Conor Gallagher, where are we? What do you think is going to happen in this final next couple of weeks of the window? Will Conor Gallagher potentially be a Spurs player? Will he go anywhere this window, in your opinion, Ben?
I mean, if I was a betting man, I would say no. But as I've said all window, Chelsea are going to listen to offers should they arrive. They're not transfer listing him. They're not actively offering him. But if the right number is hit, they'll listen to offers and then Gallagher will have a decision to make. But it would surprise me if Gallagher doesn't want to stay now at Chelsea until at least the summer, especially, as you say, with a League Cup final to come at the end of February. And on top of that, Pochettino still values him as both a leader and a player. I think he's been Chelsea's second best player this season behind only Cole Palmer. But Chelsea are thinking about hierarchy-wise, this is rather than the football department, the future, not the now. And maybe the 6-1 win over Borough last night gives us a little bit of a clue, because Chelsea's two midfielders were Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, and Conor Gallagher was on the bench. Cole Palmer played in the more advanced role behind Amanda Broja, and when Nkunku's fit, he'll be in that role unless they allow him to lead the line. But Chelsea are looking for an elite striker in the summer. So hypothetically, let's call that Victor Osimhen. Then Cole Palmer or Nkunku plays centrally. The other one of Cole Palmer or Nkunku plays wide. And then depending on which side, you got to make decisions between Noni Madueke, Mykhailo Mudryk, Raheem Sterling. For me, Conor Gallagher's not in that conversation, which means that his only real chance in a 4-2-3-1 of playing is in central midfield. And that's why I come back to last night, because I think that in the long term, hand on heart, if Pochettino picked his best 11 with all the targets he thinks he can get and everybody fit and everyone on form, maybe that will never happen because very rarely in football is your best 11 fit. But if he was to definitely have access to everyone on form, even now, then probably Moises Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez. And then is it Gallagher or Lavia? Leslie Ukwachukwu is another player that's highly rated. Kendry Páez has been signed for the future. And Chelsea still want another midfielder. So I think that summarizes why you've got a now factor where it feels unthinkable that Gallagher would want to leave or the football department would want him to go. And then a hierarchy position which conflicts that, which is essentially Conor Gallagher's contract expires in 2025. He's no closer to a new deal. He would expect similar wages to Moises Caicedo, 150k a week. Chelsea at the moment haven't advanced anything. So if the right offer comes in, they have to think about selling Conor Gallagher, as they really did in the summer window as well, when Spurs came calling somewhere around the 35 million mark, but they never made a formal bid because they got wind very quickly that Chelsea's valuation was a lot higher. Now it's much higher than 35 million. I'm told the valuation that Chelsea might accept is 45 million guaranteed plus add-ons. So the total package is going to be minimum 50 million, more likely 55 to 60 million, which is a similar number that Chelsea wanted for Mason Mount. Eventually they came down by 5 million. So I don't think you can get Conor Gallagher for under 50 million. 3 or 4 months ago, Tottenham were looking at Conor Gallagher for 35 million. Yes, his form has improved, but there's a bit less time left on the contract. So you can argue it both ways. It doesn't feel like a Spurs or Daniel Levy signing, unless Højbjerg leaves and unless the price drops below 50 million. And I think it's more likely that even though someone might try, I don't think we can rule that out to test Chelsea's resolve. So don't be surprised if we get drama. But I think it's more likely that Gallagher will wait, we'll see out the season, and then we'll get one clear answer, which has got nothing to do with Spurs or anyone else. Are Chelsea going to offer him a new deal? Because if the answer's no, or if Chelsea lean on him and say, we want you gone because an offer's come in, it doesn't matter how hard the player wants to fight for his position or stay. As soon as a player gets wind that the club don't actually want him to stay, the perspective can change a little bit. But nobody's told Conor Gallagher directly that they want to get rid of him. He's learning about a lot of interest, a lot of club willingness to sell him via the media. But naturally, the club is shielding him from that because he's been their captain and he's been integral this season. And this is why we get such a conflicting narrative. And I know people listen to that and again say, can't you just tell me if Spurs are going to bid? And yes or no, is he going to go? But there is no yes or no. And there is no definitiveness as to whether Spurs are going to bid, because you've got a player perspective, waiting to see if he gets offered a new contract. You've got a Pochettino perspective. He's a leader and he's playing well. So why would Pochettino or Gallagher want to have a situation where player moves and manager loses one of his best players when they've got a League Cup final in a month? Of course, that's the player in the football perspective. But it will be complicated if Bedag Eghbali calls up Conor Gallagher and says, 55 million's come in, we want you to leave. Maybe Gallagher says, if I'm not going to exit now, I'm going to be in a repeat situation in the summer. At that point, the right club might make an offer now and Gallagher could yet change his mind. So this is why the door has to be left a little bit open. It's a very complicated situation. But if I was a betting man, I would say the number Chelsea are asking for is probably too high for Tottenham to progress. And that's why, contrary to those reports in Italy, formal talks earlier in the month were not started.
Ben, there's another couple of names that are rumoured for Tottenham to be interested in if the Gallagher deal isn't one that will be prioritised. Ederson from Atalanta, 24-year-old midfielder, more of a defensive-minded player, but he still managed to chime in with 5 goals and 1 assist in his 20 Serie A appearances this season, as well as João Gomez from Wolves, with the financial state that the Midlands club find themselves in at the moment. There's been rumours from Brazil that Tottenham might look to launch a £30 million bid for him. Are either of these players that you've heard of interest in?
Wolves still don't want to lose Gomez. Don't know too much more on that one. I think Ederson has some legs, although Juventus are also in the mix. Atleti had looked historically, but have turned now to other targets. I was also told that Fulham are looking as well, and they're still in the market for some kind of central midfielder, box-to-box midfielder, defensive midfielder. And the weird thing about Ederson is that, yes, technically defensive midfielder, more a number 6 than a number 8, but he scores goals. And that is the modern defensive midfielder. A goal scoring defensive midfielder is almost a new classification, despite where they actually appear on the field. And I think Fulham are looking at Andre at Fluminense, but maybe Ederson will creep into their consideration as well. I don't think that this is something that's going to be possible in the next few days, but there's some kind of substance to it from some cursory inquiries that I've made, and it might be one to watch ahead of the summer.
Ben, I'm conscious of time. Tick off those bingo cards for the listeners on audio. They love this when I say this. Look, there's a number of Spurs players that apparently have been under the offers and they've been rejected as such, potential loan bids. One of those is for Giovanni Lo Celso. Now, as we understand that Barcelona have reportedly, this is in the last 24 hours, seen a loan bid rejected for Lo Celso. The Spurs hierarchy felt that had been a lowball offer from the Catalan club. The terms of the loan and arrangement on wages were well short of what Spurs wanted. What we understand is that Celso is really enjoying his time at Spurs under Postecoglou, who's been pretty transparent with the midfielder about how often he'll play. My concern about him is really his fitness. The inability to keep fit is a big, big problem. And given the fact we hope Spurs are going to be in some form of European football next season, on Lo Celso very quickly for you, is there genuine interest there from Barcelona? And could you see him leaving before this deadline?
Yeah, this is a breaking story from Miguel Delaney, great journalist, by the way. So I would encourage you to read his work. And I'm not able to confirm it personally because I think it broke only a few minutes before we came on air. And there's not two of me, although I'm trying to train the dog to make calls and answer WhatsApps whilst I'm on live. So I can simultaneously bring you information and come on the last word on Spurs. But it doesn't make any sense to me. Obviously, Miguel, very trustworthy. But if I'm responding to that story and presuming it to be accurate, I don't see how he gets much game time at Barcelona either. And like you say, there's been fitness issues and he's happy at Spurs. So it will be a surprise if it's true. Barcelona have got a real smokescreen going on where they love to cloud the market with names left, right and centre. We heard reports that they were in conversations for Calvin Phillips. That's not true, according to my understanding. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some substance with Lo Celso, but sometimes with a loan, we kind of say it makes sense to all parties. This is one for me that I'd be more surprised by. Again, not in any way calling into question the accuracy of a very top reporter. I'm sure if he sourced that and said that, then it is true. But the point I'm making is, how does it make sense to Tottenham if he goes there and doesn't play? How does it make sense to Barcelona, whose finances are tight, if they secure a loan and he just becomes a squad player, bit part in the second half of the season? It doesn't strike me as beneficial to Lo Celso comparative to him staying, getting fit and settling at Spurs. So if it happened and he was made available on the market at a club of Barcelona's stature, I'm not sure that that would be the best move for Tottenham or the best move for the player. That's just my personal opinion. I can't give you any sourced information. I can only react to a story that has broken by a top colleague of mine. And naturally, after this broadcast, I'll see if I can find out any more information for you.
Well, Ben, look, we always appreciate your opinion on this. Now, another one in terms of a player that we've seen Spurs turn down a bid for, that is of Emerson Royal. We understand Saudi club Al Nassr reportedly bid around 20 million for the Spurs defender, which was turned down. We're also hearing reports now that Al Nassr have turned their attention elsewhere, potentially of that Aaron Wan-Bissaka of Manchester United. There's a year left to run on his contract. By all accounts, we understand that Emerson is very, very happy at Spurs. He's been really a mainstay in Postecoglou's side to some degree, having played pretty much across the back line from left back to right back to filling in the centre. He's played 6 of the last 10 games for Spurs. Any late drama on Emerson Royal, or do you think he will be a Spurs player come the end of this window?
Yeah, I don't think he'll leave. He's happy. He's thriving under Ange Postecoglou. The ambition is clear from Al Nassr, but I'm not so sure that the Saudi club are particularly confident in getting anything done now. And as you say, that might be why they've turned to Wan-Bissaka. Wan-Bissaka is definitely one to watch for Saudi for the summer. John Murtagh went over there during the Club World Cup to build relationships, and some say start offering players. Although Manchester United sources indicate they're not planning to lose Wan-Bissaka either in January. But I think there's a stronger chance of Wan-Bissaka than Emerson Royal, who is happy at Tottenham and will have looked at the Saudi project and maybe want to leave a little bit of time and determine where it's at in the summer. Because even though it sounds quite fun getting a big wage and playing alongside Cristiano Ronaldo, we know also that Jordan Henderson's exited. Karim Benzema has a tense situation at the moment with Al Ittihad. And I think players mid-season with a big move like Saudi are going to be more reluctant to go because there's no time to do any due diligence. Where are you going to live? What's it like out there? I've been many times and I've got a lot of respect for the Saudi Pro League and the deal makers. And I think we need to judge that league between now and 2030, maybe even between now and the World Cup in 2034. So I think when people bash the project, if we're only talking in football terms, we need to put scrutiny on all of the other stuff as well. That's quite right. But if we're only looking at football terms, you can't expect the infrastructure to catch up with the ambition overnight in just 1 or 2 windows. And I think players are starting to realize that. And unless it's a short-term deal or a loan where they get the opportunity to try it and then still have an out, January is going to be very difficult to get players to go to Saudi. I've already mentioned Miguel Almiron as well. But Al Nassr are ambitious. It's a big club. It's a nice stadium. Riyadh's a good location. He'd be well compensated. But my feeling, talking to sources on the Saudi side, is that the 20 million offer was roundly rejected without a counter. And if you want to come back for a player like that in the future, as the Saudi deal makers found on behalf of Al Ittihad with Mo Salah, and it might be Al Hilal for Mo Salah over the summer, you have to protect your relationship with the club. There's no point in just knocking on the door and saying, I want someone, no. I want them again, no. I want them a third time, no. By the time you get to the third or the fourth or the fifth time, you're not smart just to keep relentlessly banging on the door with a bit more money and a bit more money. If no is a genuine no and you believe that position, then you walk away often to protect your relationship with the club, because you might want to come back in the summer, in January 2025, and then feel there is a window of opportunity. So I think Al Nassr have been left in no uncertain terms that this is going to be a very difficult transfer to pull off now. And the main reason for that is very simple, that Spurs don't really want to sell and Royal doesn't really want to leave.
Ben, you said today that Tottenham could be a team to watch in the race for Joshua Zirkzee, the striker at Bologna. What can you tell us about that?
Zirkzee is a very interesting one. Again, we're very much talking about the summer. And I think there's 2 left field names, if we can call them that, although both having good seasons. One is Zirkzee and the other is Santi Jimenez. And Tottenham have got so many lists of strikers that it will kind of depend on the dynamic. It will depend on Richarlison. It will depend on Son, and if he continues to lead the line when everybody's fit. But Xerxes one to watch. Jimenez is one to watch. Jonathan David is a third name to throw in the mix as well, who Spurs had looked at under Paratici and Conte. So we need to understand now whether they might return under the new recruitment team and Ange Postecoglou. There's nothing yet. But a lot of sources had indicated when Conte was still at the club that Jonathan David was being very seriously looked at. And with Xerxes, I think Tottenham, Arsenal, Manchester United are the 3 for summer, not now. There is a release clause, but if Bologna are to be believed, this is what they've said on record, it only applies to Bayern Munich, and it's 40 million euros. But that will kind of give you the yardstick valuation. But it doesn't appear, if Bologna's public statement is true, that Tottenham or anyone else could trigger that clause directly. But the basic valuation is just over 30 million. There's been no approach yet, and I think that it could gather legs. The advantage of Xerxes is that in just 19 appearances, there's been 12 goal involvements. I think he's scored 8 and got 4 assists. But also, he's very strong aerially, and he does a lot of unsung work defensively. So we're seeing a pattern here in terms of Tottenham targets. Players that work their socks off, players that are prepared to go out of position and then recover, players that are selfless and alert to their teammates, forwards that defend, defenders that score goals, midfielders that cover ground in both boxes, because that is the high octane. Whereas maybe under Antonio Conte, it was more about game management. There were more rigid tactical instructions. That's definitely not the case under Ange Postecoglou. You've got to be able to adapt. It doesn't matter what your position is. You've got to be able to play in position and out of position. Xerxes reminds me of Olivier Giroud. I think he'd be a very good signing for Tottenham. I think Manchester United are the only ones that have really advanced this, again, with a view to the summer. I think Arsenal and Spurs have still got work to do in terms of actually starting more formal, if you like, communications. What they've done is tracked. What they've done is discussed. What they've done is worked a little bit on the player side. But that's about it at the moment. So one to watch for the summer, but nothing to get overly excited about right now.
There's a couple of young players from the Championship that Tottenham, again, are rumoured to be interested in. Jonathan Rowe, Hayden Hackney and Adam Wharton. Do you know if there's anything to those links at the moment?
Yeah, Hayden Hackney for sure, in no rush to leave. So could be one for the summer, a very technically gifted midfielder. I would reiterate the story that I gave you last time on Last Word on Spurs, which is Casey McAteer at Leicester. I've mentioned him before. That could grow legs. I still think 2025, not 2024. Remember, your club is simultaneously working for the now and planning 3 windows ahead. Noel Buck isn't impossible. He's currently at New England Revolution. Tottenham's interest is historical. So if they are to reignite that, they'll have to move rather than continue anything ongoing at the time of recording. But the fee there is quite cheap. It's only about 5 or 6 million. Personally, talking sources, I don't think Adam Wharton will happen. Crystal Palace are more active as it stands. And he is also far more expensive comparative to a player like Buck. I think the fee might be as high as £15 million. Certainly 10 million plus add-ons, though. There's no doubt Spurs have looked. But they would have to, again, be reactive and catch up with where currently Crystal Palace are in talks. Everton also like Wharton, and Newcastle will be linked, but not within their budget at the moment unless they have outgoings.
Just the last one I'm going to throw at you, Ben. A few potential departures for the rest of this window. Maybe one that we're looking more towards the summer. But with Ryan Sessegnon, Brian Hill, and Tanguy Ndombele increasingly unlikely to have a future at Spurs.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility that we see some of these outgoings. With the Ndombele situation, I would say it feels like it's been one to watch for so long, and we never quite get a definitive conclusion. It is true that there's a consideration of returning to France. We have to kind of wait and see how that one develops. I put in a few calls regarding this one as to what the exact situation is regarding his Galatasaray loan, because obviously the Turkish club will play a part in all of this. And the feeling is that it hasn't worked out brilliantly. I think he's only made 7 appearances so far. So they will be open if a recall is possible and then a deal materializes for something. But they're not, from what I'm told, hell-bent on getting rid of him at this stage. So I know we see reports about a termination of the loan before the end of the window. I think, based on how the industry works and based on other terminations, if that was genuine and Galatasaray wanted him out, then it already would have happened. So it's probably more one in Tottenham's control. With Gil, there is a willingness to listen to offers. Fenerbahce are keen, so another Turkish move, but more for the summer. There's nothing, I'm told, as far as January is concerned, advanced with Lazio, another club that have been linked. There are some suggestions from sources that there might be some late Premier League interest. I would keep an eye on Burnley. And I can also tell you that Brentford actually wanted to explore a loan earlier in the window, but they didn't actually move. But they had discussed the player internally due to a mix of injuries and players off to AFCON as well, but nothing happened. So I don't see them entering the mix, but we might get a late surprise Premier League suitor. So I think that Tottenham will have some outgoings for sure. But when you're dealing with loans like terminated, and when you're dealing with players where the club want to listen to offers, but nothing's yet come, it is quite dicey, because to get a player back from a loan and then have to resolve the situation, time is running out. And obviously to listen to a late offer, it's much more likely that Tottenham will be made to sweat now because we're in that point of the window. So I think there'll be a fair few clubs with Gil that have kind of got him on the radar and say, we're either going to come to Spurs late and try and get it done on our terms, or we've got an A target, if you want to call it that, even though clubs would never term it this way. You've got an A target and you don't get that A target for whatever reason, and then you suddenly decide we're going to pivot. I think that may be the case in the final few days or hours of the window, and then it will be up to Tottenham and the player to decide whether there's a right fit there. But at the moment, not a massive amount of concrete movement. And it's all very well saying that. And if I was saying that in the summer, I'd be confident and I would just basically end the show and say, fine, I'll speak to you again in a month. And maybe then the situation will have moved. But there's always that sort of sweat as a journalist because you can say something quite definitively. And at the time we're recording, it's accurate to my understanding, but the window's so crazy that something could definitely change on the front of the outgoings that we're talking about in the next 7 days or so. So let's just kind of see. I'm a bit cautious with these type of outgoings because you will get some last-ditch attempts simply because, as I said before, clubs that have a target and don't get that target will suddenly pivot very quickly.
Ben, I have to apologise. We have taken you a couple of minutes over time. I mean it when I always say this, that it is honestly, genuinely a pleasure. We're humbled. We're always delighted to have you on. And I've got to say, whenever you come on, the feedback we have from our viewers and listeners, you are adored, you are loved. They want to hear more from you. And it's one of those things where it is the window. We have, I think, just lost Ben there. But I'm sure, Matt, you'll agree there. What a window it has been. We're going to bring Ben back in very quick if we can. Ben, just want to again say thank you so much. You know, it's the most busiest time of your year, this and the summer. We can't thank you enough. Always a pleasure to have you on. Ben, where can everybody find you? I don't know where to find you.
Yeah, I was told I was adored and I was loved, which is very kind and very exaggerated. But at the same time, I was kicked out of the studio. So that is obviously a sign. You can find me at Jacobs Ben on X, on TalkSport, doing Premier League commentary and reporting. I will also be working on deadline day, doing regular updates with my colleague Alex Crook on TalkSport. So keep across that. Still writing and podcasting, and obviously on 100 different fan-led podcasts as well. But Last Word on Spurs is my favourite.
Oh, Ben, listen, mate, you are our favourite. You're an absolute diamond. We can't thank you enough. I'm sure Matt will agree. Listen, every time the window opens, you are the main man we love to bring on. Right, Matty? I'm sure you agree with that.
Yeah, I constantly in awe of the knowledge and the insight and the memory and just Ben, you're an absolute gem and really, really appreciate your time.
I gotta say, Ben, my wife would love you because everyone says it's the quietest I've ever seen Ricky whenever Ben comes on. So my wife would adore you. We'll have to arrange that separately and you could save my marriage at the same time. Ben, thank you so much, you diamond. Matty, thank you. Guys, thank you so much for listening, watching and viewing wherever you are around the world. There you are. We are 1 week to go in this transfer window. This man set us up, Ben Jacobs. We are delighted to have him back on and we wish Ben, of course, Ben, a very peaceful, a happy end to the window for you, my man. A man that does not stop working beyond January, beyond the summer. He is non-stop relentless. That's why we love him. Ben, thank you so much. Matt, thank you so much. Guys, thank you so much. Tomorrow, we turn our attention to the FA Cup from myself, from Matty, and of course, the wonderful Ben Jacobs. We've been the last one on Spurs. Keep safe, keep well.